Rain falls steadily over downtown Atlanta, turning the cracked sidewalks into glistening rivers of light. Street lamps buzz faintly, their orange halos reflecting off puddles that ripple with every drop. The city is quiet tonight. Too quiet. Patrolling in his black and white cruiser, Officer Daniel Blake grips the steering wheel loosely, his eyes scanning the wet streets. He likes nights like this. Fewer people around, fewer witnesses. His radio crackles with routine calls, minor disturbances, a car accident a few blocks away, but nothing urgent in his sector. As he rounds the corner of an alley off Peachtree Street, something catches his eye, a figure hunched against a brick wall, wrapped in a soaked, tattered blanket. The man's head is down, knees pulled up to his chest, as if trying to disappear into himself. Blake slows the cruiser, eyes narrowing. In his mind, the equation is simple. Homeless black man in his district equals trouble. He pulls over, kills the engine, and steps out into the cold drizzle. His boots splash in shallow puddles, each step deliberate, echoing in the narrow street. The man looks up slowly. His face is weathered, with a graying beard and deep lines carved by years of hardship. This is Marcus Reed, though Blake doesn't know his name yet. What he sees is just another face that doesn't belong on his streets. "What the hell are you doing here?" Blake's voice is sharp, cutting through the sound of rain. Marcus's lips tremble as he answers, "Just trying to stay warm, officer." His tone is calm, respectful even, but it only fuels Blake's disdain. "This isn't a shelter," Blake snaps. "Get up." Marcus hesitates, his joints stiff from the cold. "Sir, I said get up!" Blake's voice rises, carrying an edge of rage. He grabs the man by the arm, yanking him to his feet. Marcus stumbles, slipping on the wet pavement. Blake doesn't wait. He shoves Marcus against the brick wall, the impact sending a hollow thud into the rainy night. Marcus tries to steady himself, but a punch to the ribs steals his breath. Somewhere across the street, under the dim awning of a closed cafe, a faint light glows, a cell phone camera recording. A young woman, hidden in the shadows, watches with wide, horrified eyes as she captures everything. Blake doesn't notice. His focus is on asserting dominance. Another punch lands, then a shove to the ground. Marcus coughs, gasping for air, his palms scraping against the wet concrete. "You people never learn," Blake mutters, standing over him. The words are barely audible over the rain, but the cruelty in his tone is unmistakable. Marcus, clutching his side, doesn't respond. Not out of fear, he's endured worse, but because he knows that anything he says could make it worse. Blake steps back, breathing hard, his jaw tight. "Get out of here before I run you in for vagrancy." He turns, walking toward his cruiser. Marcus struggles to his feet, leaning against the wall for support. The rain washes down his face, mixing with the sting of humiliation. Across the street, the young woman with the phone slips away into the darkness. She's already uploading the video. Blake drives off, never looking back. To him, it's just another night, another lesson taught. But 2 hours later, in a cramped apartment on the south side of town, the video hits social media. The grainy footage shows every detail, the punches, the shoves, the cold words. By dawn, it will have been shared thousands of times. By noon, tens of thousands. And somewhere in the city, a police chief will see it and call Officer Blake into his office. By the time the first streaks of pale dawn touch the skyline, Atlanta's streets are already stirring with life. Delivery trucks rumble along wet roads, coffee shops flick on their neon signs, and the smell of fresh pastries drifts into the misty morning air. But behind closed doors, in homes and apartments across the city, something else is happening, something that will change the day entirely. On dozens of phones, the same video begins to play. It's grainy, shaky, and dimly lit, but the images are clear enough. Officer Daniel Blake, fists clenched, standing over a homeless black man pinned against a wall. The sounds are even worse, the thud of blows, the strained voice telling him to get out, and the cold bite of that final remark, "You people never learn." At first, it spreads among a few friends. The young woman who filmed it, Jasmine Cole, a college student, had uploaded it to her private social media page with a simple caption, "This happened last night. Please share." She hadn't expected it to blow up, but by the time she finishes her morning coffee, her phone is buzzing nonstop. The clip has been reposted hundreds of times. Within an hour, it's on community pages. 2 hours later, it's on local activist accounts. And soon it's on the feed of the city's most followed news blogger who adds just one word, unacceptable. Meanwhile, Marcus Reed lies in a hospital bed at Grady Memorial, a thin hospital blanket pulled to his chin. His ribs ache with every breath, and his left eye is swelling shut. A nurse named Elaine Patterson takes his vitals and shakes her head at the bruises. "You need to press charges," she says quietly. Marcus just stares at the ceiling. People like me? No one listens. But this time, someone is listening. A lot of someones. Across town in the break room of the 7th Precinct, two rookie officers watch the clip on one of their phones. Neither says a word, but the silence between them is loaded. They both know Blake's reputation. They both know this isn't the first time. In a diner on Auburn Avenue, a group of construction workers huddle around a phone, shaking their heads in disgust. "That's messed up, man," one says, slamming his coffee cup down. "He's in uniform, for God's sake." The video makes its way into more hands. Teachers, lawyers, pastors, barbers. By mid-morning, it's trending locally. By lunch, it's trending nationally. The hashtag justice for Marcus starts appearing in bold white letters over black backgrounds. Jasmine is overwhelmed. She keeps getting calls from numbers she doesn't recognize, messages from reporters, even threats from anonymous accounts. A friend tells her to be careful. "You know they're gonna come after you," he warns. She nods, already feeling the weight of what she started. Back at the precinct, Blake hasn't seen the video yet. He's on his second cup of coffee, leaning back in his chair, chatting casually with another officer. He still believes last night was just another routine stop, another nobody he put in his place. He has no idea that outside these walls, his face is being shared by the thousands, and that people are calling for his badge. In the office above, Chief Harold Reynolds sits at his desk, staring at his computer screen. The video plays again and again and again. He doesn't blink. His jaw tightens, not just at the brutality, but at the fallout he knows is coming. There are rules, there's procedure, and then there's reality. And reality is this: in less than 24 hours, the city will be demanding answers. Reporters will camp outside the station. Protesters will fill the streets. And unless this is handled right, it could tear the department apart. The chief picks up the phone. "Get me Blake," he says simply. Downstairs, Blake hears the call from the desk sergeant. "Chief wants to see you, now." Something in the sergeant's tone makes Blake pause, but he masks it with a smirk, tossing his coffee cup in the trash. "Guess I'm popular today," he mutters. Outside, the rain has stopped, but the city feels heavier. Every second, more eyes are watching, more voices are speaking, and more people are waiting to see what happens next. By the end of the day, Officer Daniel Blake will walk into the chief's office, and the real story will begin. By early afternoon, the 7th Precinct feels different. Conversations stop when Blake walks into a room. Officers glance at each other, then back at him, their faces tight, unreadable. He notices, but tells himself it's nothing. Blake has been on the force for nearly 14 years. He's learned that in this building, loyalty means looking the other way. He's covered for others before, and they've done the same for him. In his mind, what happened with Marcus was no different. Just another night enforcing order in his city. But behind closed doors, the video is already circulating inside the department. Some officers refuse to watch it. Others watch and say nothing. Silence is safer. Speaking up can end a career. At the far end of the hall, Detective Carla Mitchell sits at her desk, her phone buzzing with messages from community contacts. She watches the clip twice, each time feeling her stomach knot. She's seen Blake lose his temper before, but this is different. This isn't anger. This is contempt, recorded for the whole world to see. She looks up as Sergeant Bill Harlan passes by. "You've seen it?" she asks quietly. Harlan's jaw flexes. "Yeah." He glances around to make sure no one's listening. "Keep your head down. This one's gonna get ugly." Meanwhile, in a corner booth of a small coffee shop across town, Marcus's younger brother, Terrence Reed, scrolls through his phone. He hasn't spoken to Marcus in months, not since an argument that ended with slammed doors and long silences, but when he sees the video, his throat tightens. Terrence remembers a different Marcus, the man who used to coach him in basketball at the rec center, who bought him ice cream after games. Before the war, before the injuries, before the streets. He can't reconcile that memory with the man lying bruised in a hospital bed. He stands abruptly, knocking over his coffee. He doesn't care. He's going to see his brother. Back at the hospital, Marcus lies awake, staring at the slow-moving hands of the clock. He hears the distant beeping of machines in other rooms, the squeak of rubber soles on tile floors. He knows what's happening outside. Nurses keep talking about the video, but part of him doesn't believe it will change anything. He's been invisible for so long. At the precinct, Blake sits in the locker room, scrolling through his phone. A few news headlines catch his eye. Atlanta officer caught on video in brutal arrest. Activists demand action after shocking clip surfaces. His thumb freezes over the play button on one post. The thumbnail is unmistakable. It's him, standing over Marcus. He taps it. The sound of rain. The shaky frame. His own voice, harsh and cold. You people never learn. Blake feels a strange jolt in his chest, part anger, part disbelief. He throws his phone onto the bench, muttering, "Out of context, they don't know the whole story." But deep down, he knows there is no context that can wash away what the camera caught. In the chief's office upstairs, Harold Reynolds reviews an email from the mayor's office. It's short and to the point. Public pressure is mounting. Handle this immediately. The chief exhales slowly, rubbing his temples. He's known Blake for years, but personal connections mean nothing now. If the department is to survive the storm that's coming, this will require more than damage control. It will require a public reckoning. He picks up the phone again. Send him in. A moment later, Blake steps through the door. You wanted to see me, Chief? His voice is casual, almost defiant. Reynolds gestures to the chair across from his desk. Sit down. The air between them is heavy. Rain begins again outside, tapping against the tall windows. On the chief's desk, a laptop screen is paused mid-frame on the video. Do you know what this is? Reynolds asks, his voice low. Blake glances at the screen, shrugs. Looks like someone filming me doing my job. The chief leans forward, eyes locking onto his. No, this is you beating a homeless veteran in the middle of the night. This is you putting this department at risk. And this, he taps the screen, is going to be played on every TV in the country before dinner. Blake's jaw tightens. Chief, the guy was resisting. Don't, Reynolds cuts in sharply. I've been doing this long enough to know when a man's lying to me. You need to understand something, Daniel. This isn't going away. You've crossed a line and the whole damn country just watched you do it. For the first time all day, Blake has no response. The rain outside grows heavier, filling the silence between them. And somewhere deep in the city, thousands of strangers, teachers, students, pastors, barbers, are already deciding what should happen to Officer Daniel Blake next. By the next morning, Atlanta feels different. News vans line the street outside the 7th precinct, their satellite dishes pointed toward the sky. Reporters huddle under umbrellas, microphones ready, waiting for any official statement. Camera flashes pop whenever an officer walks out the door. Inside the station, the atmosphere is tense. Phones ring constantly, the front desk flooded with calls from angry residents, journalists, and activists demanding answers. Chief Reynolds hasn't left his office since dawn. His inbox is a flood of emails from city officials, civil rights groups, and even federal contacts. Down in the locker room, Blake moves through his routine as if nothing has changed. Showering, dressing, tying his boots, but he can feel the stares. He can hear the low conversations that stop when he enters the room. The thin wall of loyalty that once protected him feels paper thin now. In a newsroom downtown, Channel 8 news producer Lena Matthews watches the viral video on a loop. Each replay makes her jaw clench tighter. She knows a story like this will dominate headlines for days, maybe weeks. She starts drafting the evening segment. Exclusive, officer caught on camera in brutal assault. She calls one of her field reporters, Evan Porter. I want you at Grady Memorial, she says. Find Marcus Reed. We get his story on camera and we run it at 6. Meanwhile, Marcus sits in his hospital bed, still sore from the beating. Terrence is in the room now, leaning against the window ledge. The brothers haven't spoken in months, but the distance between them feels smaller in this moment. I saw it, Terrence says quietly. Everybody's seen it. Marcus gives a faint nod. Doesn't change much. It should, Terrence replies, his voice firm. You served this country, Marcus. You don't deserve... The door opens. A nurse steps in, followed by Evan Porter and a cameraman. Mr. Reed, Evan says, I'm with Channel 8. We'd like to talk to you about what happened. Marcus hesitates. Cameras have never been his world, but Terrence gives him a small nod. Tell them, he says. People need to hear it from you. Back at the precinct, Chief Reynolds stares at a printed memo from City Hall. Hold a press conference within 24 hours. He knows this isn't just about Blake anymore. It's about the department's credibility, the city's trust, and whether the public believes justice will actually be served. At noon, the first protest begins forming outside. A handful of people with homemade signs, "Justice for Marcus," "Stop police brutality," stand in the drizzle, chanting. By 2 p.m., the crowd has doubled. By 4 p.m., traffic on the street is nearly blocked. Inside, Detective Carla Mitchell walks past the chief's office and hears voices raised. She catches only fragments. Department image. Public outrage. Officer suspension. She knows the sound of a political firestorm when she hears one. At 5:30, Lena Matthews watches her screen as the interview with Marcus comes in. His voice is calm but carries weight. "He didn't see me as a person, just another problem to get rid of. I fought for this country, and last night, I had to fight just to breathe." The footage is raw, unpolished. It doesn't need polish. By 6:05, it's airing on televisions in bars, living rooms, and restaurants across Atlanta. By 6:10, clips are spreading on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. Civil rights organizations retweet it with calls for accountability. A well-known activist lawyer offers pro bono representation. Blake sees it too. Sitting alone in his car, parked a block from the station, he watches Marcus's interview on his phone. He feels something he won't admit to anyone, a flicker of unease. The narrative is slipping away from him. In the chief's office, Reynolds stands at the window, watching the growing crowd outside. He knows tomorrow's press conference will set the tone for what comes next. He also knows Blake's future with the department is hanging by a thread. He turns back to his desk, picks up the phone, and dials. "Daniel," he says when the line picks up, "be in my office at 8 a.m. sharp, no excuses." Outside, the chants grow louder, echoing through the night air. And in every corner of the city, eyes are fixed on what will happen next. Night has settled over Atlanta, but the streets outside the 7th precinct are still alive. Floodlights from news crews cast long shadows across the crowd of protesters. Some chant, some hold candles, and others stream the scene live to thousands of viewers. Police barricades keep the crowd at a distance, but their voices carry over the rain-slick pavement. In a third-floor apartment across town, Jasmine Cole sits at her desk, laptop open, phone buzzing constantly. Since uploading the video, her life has turned inside out. There are hundreds of messages in her inbox, some thanking her for exposing Blake, others filled with venom and threats. One message in particular makes her pause. "You don't know who you're messing with. Stop before it's too late." The profile is anonymous, no picture, no posts. She swallows hard. Her roommate Kayla peeks in from the doorway. "You okay?" Jasmine forces a smile. "Yeah, just tired." She closes her laptop but leaves her phone face up on the desk. Even as she walks away, the screen lights up again with another notification. Across the city, Marcus lies awake in his hospital bed, the soft hum of medical equipment surrounding him. Terrence is asleep in the chair by the window, arms crossed, head tilted back. Marcus stares at the ceiling, replaying the events in his mind. The rain, the fists, the voice telling him he'd never learn. He wonders how many times something like this has happened without anyone watching, without a camera, without proof. Back at the precinct, Blake sits in the dimly lit locker room, his phone in his hand. He scrolls through news articles, each one more damning than the last. His own department hasn't issued a statement yet, but the mayor's office is monitoring the situation. Civil rights lawyers are calling for his immediate arrest. A locker door slams nearby. Officer Ray Nolan, a fellow veteran of the force, steps into view. "You really stirred the hornet's nest this time," Nolan says, his voice low. Blake narrows his eyes. "I did my job." "Your job?" Nolan shakes his head. "You've got the whole city ready to burn, and for what? A guy sleeping on the street?" Blake doesn't answer. Instead, he pockets his phone and stands. "People need to know there are rules." "Yeah," Nolan mutters, "but you forgot the ones that matter." Downtown, in a cramped law office lit only by desk lamps, attorney Sheila Grant reviews the viral footage again. She's been practicing civil rights law for over 20 years, and cases like this are why she still does it. She picks up the phone and calls Terrence Reed. "I want to represent your brother," she says. "Pro bono. We'll make sure this doesn't get buried." By midnight, the protests outside the precinct grow restless. A bottle shatters against a barricade. Officers in riot gear stand ready, their shields glistening under the streetlights. Chief Reynolds, still in his office, watches from the window. He knows the line between peaceful protest and chaos is thin, and tonight it's thinner than ever. He picks up the phone again, this time calling the mayor directly. "We need to move fast," he says. "If we don't, this city's going to explode." At the same moment, in a darkened parking lot 2 blocks away, a man in a hooded sweatshirt scrolls through Jasmine Cole's social media. He pauses on a photo of her with friends, then types a short message. "You think you're safe?" He hits send and melts back into the shadows. The next morning will bring press conferences, statements, and more headlines. But tonight, Atlanta simmers, every street buzzing with the same question: will justice actually come? And for Officer Daniel Blake, the clock is ticking toward an appointment he can't avoid. 8 a.m. in the chief's office, face to face with the man who may decide his fate. Morning sunlight filters weakly through the blinds at Grady Memorial Hospital. Marcus Reed sits upright in bed, the stiffness in his ribs reminding him with every breath that the pain is still there. Terrence sits beside him, holding 2 styrofoam cups of coffee, one already cooling in his hand. "You didn't sleep," Terrence says, more as an observation than a question. Marcus gives a small shrug. "Not much to sleep for." Before Terrence can respond, the door opens. Attorney Sheila Grant steps inside, a leather satchel slung over her shoulder. She introduces herself, her voice steady and direct. "I'm here because what happened to you can't just disappear into the system. I've seen it happen too many times. I want to represent you, Marcus, pro bono." Marcus studies her for a moment. He's been promised help before, and it rarely lasted. "Why?" he asks simply. "Because I've spent 20 years fighting cases like this," Sheila replies. "And because the whole country is watching. That gives us a chance to actually win." Terrence leans forward. "You should do it, Marcus." Marcus looks down at his hands, calloused from years of labor and hardship. Finally, he nods. "All right, but if we do this, we do it my way. I'm not looking for pity." Sheila gives a faint smile. "We're not asking for pity, we're asking for justice." Across town, the newsroom at Channel 8 hums with activity. Producer Lena Matthews reviews footage from last night's protests, cutting between shots of chanting crowds and police standing rigid behind barricades. She knows today will be even bigger. The mayor's office has announced a press conference for the afternoon, and the speculation about Blake's fate is already dominating morning news shows. Reporter Evan Porter is in the field again, this time stationed outside the precinct. "Crowds are expected to double by noon," he says into the camera. "The public wants answers, and so far the department hasn't given any." In the 7th precinct, Blake walks in wearing his uniform, jaw set tight. Every step down the hallway feels heavier than the last. He's not used to this kind of attention inside his own station. Officer Ray Nolan spots him. "Chief's waiting," he says flatly. Blake doesn't reply, just pushes open the stairwell door and starts climbing. With each step, the voices from the lobby fade, replaced by the muted hum of fluorescent lights. He knows the meeting at 8 a.m. isn't going to be friendly, but he still tells himself he can talk his way through it. Back at the hospital, Sheila sets up a small audio recorder. "I want to start by having you tell me everything," she says. "Not just what happened that night, but who you are. People need to see you as more than just a headline." Marcus takes a breath. "I grew up in Decatur, joined the army when I was 19, did 2 tours in Afghanistan. Came home, thought I'd get work in construction, maybe start my own crew someday." He pauses, his gaze drifting to the window. "Then my knee went bad from an injury overseas. Work got harder to find. Bills piled up. I ended up on the street 3 years ago." Sheila listens without interrupting. "That night," Marcus continues, "I was just trying to get out of the rain. I wasn't bothering anyone. Next thing I know, he's on me, shouting, shoving, hitting, and when he said what he said..." Marcus shakes his head. "It wasn't about law, it was about hate." Sheila nods slowly. "This is exactly what people need to hear." At the precinct, Chief Reynolds sits behind his desk, the video paused on his laptop screen. Blake stands across from him, arms crossed. "You've put this department in the crosshairs," the chief says. "And before you start, spare me the 'he was resisting' routine. I've watched the footage a dozen times." Blake's jaw tightens. "Chief, with all due respect, the media's twisting this. That guy's no saint." "Neither are you," Reynolds cuts in. "And right now, the only thing the public sees is a man in uniform beating a homeless veteran. That image is going to haunt this department for years if we don't act." Blake doesn't like the word act. It sounds final. "So what, you're throwing me under the bus?" I'm giving you one chance to explain yourself at the press conference, Reynolds says. One, but if you think I'm covering for you, you're wrong. Blake's eyes flash with anger, but he keeps his voice low. Understood. By midday, word of Marcus's military service begins circulating online. Activist groups share old photos of him in uniform, smiling with his unit overseas. The hashtag justice for Marcus gains even more momentum. In homes, offices, and cafes across the country, people are no longer just angry about the beating. They're rallying behind the man who endured it. And as the afternoon press conference looms, the city waits to see whether Officer Daniel Blake will stand in front of the cameras and face the world, or whether his silence will speak louder than anything he could say. The rain starts again just before noon, a steady drizzle that slicks the streets and dampens the cardboard protest signs outside the 7th precinct. The crowd doesn't thin. If anything, the sound of rain only makes the chants sharper, echoing off the brick walls of nearby buildings. Inside, the briefing room smells faintly of coffee and damp uniforms. Officer Daniel Blake sits at a long table, the department's internal affairs investigator, Lieutenant Sarah Whitaker, seated across from him. She flips open a file thick with printed screenshots, still frames from the viral video, and typed witness statements. Blake leans back in his chair, arms crossed. I already told the chief. The guy was loitering, possibly high. He resisted when I told him to move. Whitaker's voice is calm but edged with steel. Mr. Reed was unarmed, seated, and posed no immediate threat. Multiple witnesses confirm he complied until you initiated physical contact. Can you explain why your report omits that? Blake's jaw tightens. Because it's not relevant. What matters is I acted within my training. She slides a photograph across the table. Marcus in his hospital bed, one eye swollen shut, bruises visible along his ribs. This is the result of your training? Blake doesn't look at the photo. The streets are dangerous. You don't always have the luxury of... You had the luxury, Whitaker cuts in. You had time, you had backup within 3 blocks, and you chose force. The room falls silent except for the hum of the overhead lights. Whitaker writes something in her notes before speaking again. This interview is being recorded. You should think carefully about every word you say, Officer Blake. Meanwhile, across town, Marcus sits in his hospital room watching the midday news. The segment shows a split screen. On one side, footage of the protests growing outside the precinct. On the other, his own interview from the day before. The caption reads, Veteran beaten by officer speaks out. Terrence flips the volume up. They're listening, Marcus. People are showing up because of you. Marcus shakes his head. They're showing up because they're tired of seeing the same story. I'm just the latest headline. Attorney Sheila Grant stands at the foot of the bed, a legal pad in hand. Headlines can open doors. If the department feels enough pressure, they'll have no choice but to act. But we need more than public outrage. We need a case that sticks. At the precinct, Detective Carla Mitchell walks past the briefing room and catches sight of Blake through the small window in the door. His body language screams defiance, but she can see the tension in his shoulders. She's known Blake long enough to recognize when he's feeling cornered. She lingers in the hallway until Whitaker steps out. How's it going? Carla asks quietly. Whitaker sighs. He's stonewalling, but his story doesn't match the video, and the witnesses are solid. He knows he's in trouble. By mid-afternoon, the protest outside has doubled in size. Large banners stretch across the barricades. Justice for Marcus and End Police Brutality. National news crews now stand alongside local reporters, their live feeds broadcasting to audiences across the country. In the mayor's office, phones ring non-stop. Advisors gather around a long table, reviewing polling data and public sentiment. We can't wait for the department to handle this quietly, one aide says. If we don't act, it'll look like we're protecting him. The mayor nods grimly. Call the chief. Tell him Blake needs to be suspended immediately. And clear my schedule for tomorrow. I want to meet Marcus Reed in person. Back in the interrogation room, Whitaker closes the file. Officer Blake, you are now under official investigation for excessive use of force and conduct unbecoming. You are to surrender your badge and service weapon pending the outcome. Blake's face hardens. You're kidding me. This isn't a joke, Whitaker replies. The chief will brief you before the press conference. Blake stands abruptly, the chair legs scraping the floor. You're all caving to politics. Whitaker meets his glare without flinching. No, we're responding to the truth. That evening, as the sun dips behind the skyline, the crowd outside the precinct, swells one last time before the press conference. Candles flicker in the hands of protesters. Chants rise and fall like waves. Inside, Chief Reynolds prepares his statement. Every word has been weighed for impact. Every sentence crafted to show the department is taking this seriously. But he knows the real turning point isn't what he says tonight. It's what happens after. And somewhere down the hall, Daniel Blake sits alone, his badge lying on the table in front of him, wondering how quickly a man's life can change when the whole world is watching. The night air outside the 7th precinct carries the mixed sounds of chants, camera shutters, and the occasional rumble of passing traffic. The press conference has just ended, Chief Reynolds delivering his careful promise of a thorough and transparent investigation into Officer Daniel Blake. The crowd greeted his words with cautious applause, hopeful but far from satisfied. Inside, Reynolds closes the door to his office and leans back against it, exhausted. The day has been one long battle between public relations and reality. He knows tomorrow will be worse. Just as he sits at his desk, Detective Carla Mitchell knocks softly. "Chief, there's something you should see." She steps inside holding a flash drive. "A woman came in about an hour ago. Says she was there the night of the incident. She filmed part of it too. Different angle." Reynolds straightens in his chair. "Different from the viral video?" Carla nods. "Yeah. And it shows more than what's already out there." Across town, Jasmine Cole sits on her bed, scrolling through the latest headlines about Marcus. She's still shaken by the threats she's received, but tonight, something pushes her past fear. She pulls up the original clip she recorded and compares it to the one circulating online. The viral version is only a minute long. Her original is nearly 3 minutes. The extra footage shows what happened before Blake even approached Marcus. It's clear Marcus was sitting quietly, head down, not interacting with anyone. No loitering in a business doorway, no aggressive behavior as Blake claimed. Jasmine's hands tremble as she drafts an email to Marcus's attorney, Sheila Grant. "I think you need the full video. It's worse than people know." She attaches the file and hits send. Back at Grady Memorial Hospital, Sheila opens Jasmine's email in the dim light of Marcus's room. She watches the new footage twice, her expression hardening. "This changes everything," she says quietly. Marcus looks up. "How?" "Because now we have proof he lied in his report. And once we show that, the rest of his cases could come under review. This could be a lot bigger than just what happened to you." At the precinct, Reynolds plugs the flash drive Carla gave him into his laptop. On screen, the second witness's footage begins. The angle is from across the street, partially obstructed by a parked van, but it catches Blake arriving, stepping out of his cruiser and walking straight to Marcus. No hesitation, no questioning, just immediate aggression. The chief exhales slowly. "This is bad." Carla folds her arms. "There's more. The woman says Blake harassed her teenage son 2 months ago. No charges were filed, but she's willing to talk on record." Reynolds knows what that means. If more stories start surfacing, the department's control over the narrative is gone. By morning, Sheila delivers both videos, the original full clip from Jasmine and the new angle from the second witness, to a local investigative journalist she trusts. "You'll know what to do with these," she says, sliding the USB drive across the table. Within hours, the journalist's report goes live online. New videos show officers' actions were unprovoked. Department report under scrutiny. Both clips are embedded in the article, alongside comparisons to Blake's official statement. The contradictions are impossible to miss. The story spreads like wildfire. National outlets pick it up before noon. Civil rights organizations call for Blake's immediate termination and a criminal investigation. The phrase "pattern of abuse" starts appearing in headlines. In the locker room, Blake slams his locker shut so hard it rattles the metal. "They're lying," he mutters under his breath, but he can feel the ground shifting beneath him. A few officers who once greeted him with nods now keep their distance. Conversations stop when he passes. Ray Nolan appears in the doorway. "You see the new footage?" "I'm not watching that garbage." "You should," Nolan says quietly. "Because if this keeps going, it's not just your badge on the line. The DA's office is sniffing around." Blake turns away. "I'll deal with it." But even as he says it, he's not sure how. By late afternoon, the protest outside the precinct swells again. This time louder, angrier. People hold up signs showing screenshots from the new videos. Reporters shout questions at any officer who steps outside. Inside, Reynolds meets with the city's legal counsel. "If we don't act decisively, the lawsuits will cripple us," the lawyer warns. And if more witnesses come forward, we're not talking about one bad night. We're talking about years of liability. The chief nods grimly. Then maybe it's time we stop protecting him. That evening, Sheila visits Marcus again. The pressure's working, she tells him. I think they're close to suspending him permanently. But we can't stop here. We push for criminal charges. Marcus leans back, wincing slightly from the pain in his ribs. If it means he can't do this to someone else, then yeah, let's push. Outside his window, the sounds of the city filter in. Horns, distant voices, the constant hum of movement. But beneath it all is a growing sense that change for once might actually be possible. And for Officer Daniel Blake, the circle of protection he's relied on for years is starting to close. By sunrise, the mood inside the 7th Precinct is different. The hum of conversation in the hallways is sharper, more cautious. Officers who once spoke freely in the break room now lower their voices or stop talking altogether when certain people walk in, especially Daniel Blake. The previous night's release of the second video has changed everything. It's no longer just a viral clip. It's now documented proof that Blake lied in his official report. The fact that two separate sources captured the same sequence from different angles has made the department's usual tactic, questioning the credibility of the witness, useless. In the chief's office, Harold Reynolds sits at his desk, reading through a printed stack of Blake's past incident reports. Most are uneventful, but a few stand out. Complaints of excessive force, all dismissed or resolved internally. Looking at them now, in light of the new evidence, they read differently. Detective Carla Mitchell steps in. Morning, Chief. Reynolds gestures toward the chair across from him. You've been here a long time, Carla. How many of these complaints do you think have merit? Carla doesn't hesitate. More than the department wanted to admit at the time. The chief sighs. I've got the DA breathing down my neck. If this turns into a pattern of abuse case, it's going to be bigger than just Blake. It could drag in everyone who signed off on him over the years. Carla leans forward. Then maybe it's time to stop protecting him. Across town, Marcus wakes to the sound of the morning news playing on the hospital's TV. The anchor is speaking over footage from last night's protests. The lower third graphic reading, calls grow for criminal charges against Officer Blake. Terrence sits at the side of the bed, phone in hand. You're trending again, he says with a small grin. Marcus shakes his head. I'm not trying to trend, I'm trying to heal. Attorney Sheila Grant enters, setting her bag on the chair. Healing's important, but so is momentum. The DA's office reached out to me this morning. They want to meet. Today. Marcus raises an eyebrow. What for? To discuss criminal charges. They're finally taking this seriously. Meanwhile, in a quiet corner of the precinct, Ray Nolan stands at the coffee machine when Blake walks in. The air between them feels heavier than usual. You've been my partner on more calls than I can count, Nolan says quietly, but you need to face the fact that no one's covering for you this time. Blake snorts. So that's it? You're just going to turn your back? I'm not turning my back, Nolan says. I'm telling you the truth. The chief's looking at your whole record now, and if you think this is just about Marcus Reed, you're wrong. Blake sets his jaw. They're not going to fire me over some street trash. Nolan's face hardens. That street trash is a decorated veteran, and you've just made him the most sympathetic man in this city. Blake turns away, muttering under his breath, but the words carry no confidence. At City Hall, the mayor meets with the Police Oversight Committee. The political cost of inaction is too high, one member says. If we don't show leadership here, we lose the public's trust entirely. The mayor nods slowly. Then let's give them what they want. I'll publicly call for Blake's suspension without pay and recommend the DA pursue charges. Later that afternoon, Sheila escorts Marcus into the DA's office. The meeting is brief but decisive. The DA lays out a plan for presenting the case to a grand jury. Between the two videos, the witness statements, and the inconsistencies in Blake's report, we have enough to move forward, the DA says. Marcus listens quietly, still unsure if justice will truly come. But for the first time, he feels like the system might actually be leaning in his favor. Back at the precinct, Chief Reynolds calls a closed-door meeting with senior staff. Effective immediately, he says, Officer Daniel Blake is suspended without pay pending the outcome of the criminal investigation. The room is silent for a moment before the murmurs begin. Some nod in agreement, others shift uncomfortably, worried about what this means for the department's reputation. When Blake hears the news, his face goes pale. Suspended? Without pay? He repeats, as if the words themselves don't make sense. You brought this on yourself, Reynolds says flatly. Turn in your badge and gun. Blake stares at him for a long moment before finally placing the badge on the desk. The metallic clink echoes in the room. Without another word, he turns and walks out. That evening, the news spreads quickly. Crowds outside the precinct cheer when they hear he's been suspended. Signs go up with new slogans: "One step closer" and "Next, criminal charges." In his hospital bed, Marcus watches the coverage, his expression unreadable. Terrence leans in. "Feels good, doesn't it?" Marcus exhales slowly. It's a start, but deep down, both brothers know the fight is far from over. By the next morning, the protests outside the 7th precinct have swelled beyond anything the city has seen in years. Streets are blocked for 3 full blocks in every direction, traffic diverted by flashing barricades and officers in neon vests. The air smells faintly of rain, cardboard signs, and the hot grease from food trucks that have parked to serve the growing crowd. The chants roll in waves. "Justice for Marcus! No more silence! Prosecute Blake!" Television cameras catch it all, broadcasting live to homes across the country. Inside City Hall, the mayor stands at a tall window overlooking the scene. "It's not just a protest anymore," an aide says from behind him. "It's a movement." The mayor turns. "Then we treat it like one. Schedule the press conference for 3 p.m. today. I'm speaking directly to the people." At Grady Memorial Hospital, Marcus sits with attorney Sheila Grant and his brother Terrence, watching the coverage on a small TV mounted to the wall. The sight of so many strangers chanting his name feels strange, both humbling and overwhelming. "They're not just here for me," Marcus says quietly. "They're here because they're tired of seeing this happen." Sheila nods. "Exactly. That's why we have to keep the momentum. The mayor's press conference is our chance to push for charges." Terrence leans forward. "What if they're just using it to calm people down?" "They might try," Sheila admits. "But the difference this time is that the whole country is watching. That changes the game." At the precinct, Detective Carla Mitchell walks through the crowded hallways, stepping around uniformed officers and plainclothes detectives. She can feel the tension in the air, the kind that comes when the outside world forces its way into the building. She passes a group of officers whispering near the break room. "They're gonna hang Blake out to dry," one says. "Better him than all of us," another replies. Carla keeps moving, but the exchange lingers in her mind. She's worked enough years to know when the so-called blue wall of silence is starting to crack. Meanwhile, Daniel Blake sits in his apartment, blinds drawn, phone buzzing with missed calls and messages. News anchors speak his name like it's a curse, his face flashing on every channel. His lawyer, a department-recommended defense attorney, has told him to stay quiet, but the silence feels like a trap. He flips through the channels until he lands on a live shot of the protests. Signs with his name in bold block letters fill the screen. In some, the word "guilty" is stamped across his face in red. He changes the channel. At 2:55 p.m., the steps of City Hall are packed with reporters, microphones angled toward the podium. The mayor steps up, flanked by Chief Reynolds and members of the Police Oversight Committee. The crowd quiets, a tense anticipation hanging in the air. "Good afternoon," the mayor begins. "Over the past several days, our city has witnessed events that have shaken us to the core. The treatment of Mr. Marcus Reed by Officer Daniel Blake was unacceptable and does not reflect the values of this city or this department." A murmur runs through the crowd. Cameras click in rapid bursts. "Effective immediately," the mayor continues, "I am recommending that the district attorney's office pursue criminal charges against Officer Blake. Furthermore, we will be reviewing all prior complaints and cases involving him to determine whether additional action is warranted." The square erupts, cheers, applause, chants renewed with fresh energy. Reporters shout questions, but the mayor raises a hand for silence. "This is not the end," he says. "It is the beginning of a process to restore trust between this city and its people. Justice must not only be done, it must be seen to be done." Watching from his hospital room, Marcus feels a tightness in his chest. Not pain, but a weight he's been carrying for years starting to lift, just slightly. Terrence grips his shoulder. "They're going after him, man. This is it." Sheila doesn't smile, but her eyes are sharper. "This is a step, but remember, recommendations aren't convictions. We still have work to do." Back in his apartment, Blake watches the press conference in disbelief. The mayor's words feel like a public execution. He paces the living room, muttering under his breath. "They're making me the villain, throwing me to the wolves." His phone rings, an unknown number. He answers cautiously. A voice on the other end says, You're not the only one they're looking at. You didn't hear it from me, but they're going through everything. Old cases, old reports. If you've got anything to hide, get ahead of it now." The line goes dead. Blake stands frozen, the implications sinking in. This isn't just about Marcus anymore. As evening falls, the protests don't slow. Instead, they shift toward the courthouse, candles flickering in the hands of marchers. Television helicopters circle overhead, their spotlights sweeping across the crowd. In homes, bars, and cafes across the country, people watch, tweet, and comment. Some see hope, others see a long road ahead. And in a quiet hospital room, Marcus Reed lies awake, wondering if the justice he's been promised will finally be real, or if it will fade like so many promises before. Daniel Blake wakes before dawn, the glow from the muted television casting long shadows across his small apartment. He hasn't slept more than a few hours since the suspension, his mind cycling through news clips, online articles, and the steady roar of protests outside his building. Even with the blinds closed, the sound of chanting drifts up from the street. He shuffles into the kitchen, pours black coffee into a chipped mug, and stands at the counter staring at nothing. His phone buzzes with another notification, another headline with his name in bold. Mayor calls for criminal charges against Officer Daniel Blake. He tosses the phone onto the counter, the screen going dark. Across town, Chief Harold Reynolds sits in his office flipping through a manila folder thick with Blake's old incident reports. Some are years old, minor use-of-force complaints that were quietly dismissed. Others are more recent and harder to ignore. A few have witness statements eerily similar to Marcus Reed's account. Detective Carla Mitchell steps in, a steaming cup of coffee in hand. "You wanted to see me?" Reynolds gestures for her to close the door. Internal Affairs is digging deeper. They're finding patterns. If the DA decides to charge him, they're going to want more than just this one incident. Carla nods. "I've already had 2 people call me today claiming they had run-ins with Blake. Neither of them ever filed formal complaints because they thought nothing would come of it." Reynolds leans back in his chair. Now they think something might. At Grady Memorial Hospital, Marcus sits propped up in bed, reading messages from strangers on a donated tablet. Some are from veterans who've been through similar experiences. Others are from families who've lost loved ones in encounters with police. Terrence walks in with a paper bag of breakfast sandwiches. "You're famous," he says, setting the bag on the tray table. "I don't want to be famous," Marcus replies. "I want to be heard." Attorney Sheila Grant arrives a few minutes later, carrying a slim binder. "We have a meeting with the DA this afternoon," she says. "They're moving forward with preparing charges. But they've also asked for your testimony to include details about the night leading up to the assault." Marcus frowns. "You mean before he even showed up?" "Yes," Sheila says. "They want to make it clear there was no provocation, no reason for him to even approach you." Marcus nods slowly. "All right, I'll tell them everything." Meanwhile, Blake sits in the corner booth of a quiet diner on the outskirts of the city, his baseball cap pulled low. He scrolls through his phone until he reaches a number he hasn't called in years. After a long pause, he dials. When the voice answers, Blake says, "They're coming after me. I need, someone to vouch for me maybe. An old case, something that shows I'm not the bad guy they're making me out to be." The voice on the other end is cold. "You burned a lot of bridges, Daniel. Don't call me again." The line goes dead. Blake sets the phone down, staring at it as if it might offer an answer. By early afternoon, the protests outside the courthouse are larger than ever. National figures have begun to arrive. Activists, lawyers, even celebrities lending their support. A massive banner hangs from a nearby building with Marcus's face beside the words, "Justice for All." Inside the DA's office, Sheila sits with Marcus and Terrence, reviewing the plan for the grand jury presentation. The DA enters, carrying a thick file. "We're filing formal charges against Officer Blake within the week," the DA at some says. "But there's more. Based on the new witnesses coming forward, we may expand the investigation to include his prior conduct." Marcus meets the DA's gaze. "If you're going to do this, do it all the way. Don't stop at me." The DA nods. "That's the idea." Back at the precinct, Chief Reynolds fields another call from City Hall. The mayor wants to know if any other officers were complicit in covering up Blake's behavior. Reynolds knows the truth, that there were plenty who looked the other way. After hanging up, he stares out the window at the city. The tide is turning, and it's not just Blake who's about to face the consequences. That evening, Blake walks into his apartment to find a yellow envelope slid under his door. Inside is a single sheet of paper. No name, no return address. The message is typed in all caps. "They know everything. You're next." Blake sinks into a chair, the paper trembling slightly in his hands. For the first time, the anger in his chest is replaced by something colder. Fear. Morning light barely filters through the overcast sky as Atlanta wakes to a storm of headlines. News alerts buzz on phones across the city. New witnesses come forward in Officer Blake investigation. District Attorney expands probe into police misconduct. At the 7th Precinct, Chief Harold Reynolds is already in his office, a stack of fresh reports on his desk. The top file contains transcripts from 2 new interviews, both from people who say Blake assaulted them in unrelated incidents over the past 3 years. Neither filed official complaints at the time. Both feared retaliation. Detective Carla Mitchell knocks once before stepping in. "Chief, you need to see this," she says, placing a flash drive in front of him. It's from a body cam, Blake's 2 months ago. The incident was marked as no video available in the system. Reynolds frowns, plugs it in, and watches. The footage shows Blake confronting a teenager in a parking lot, grabbing him by the collar before slamming him against a patrol car. No arrest, no report, just raw aggression. Reynolds exhales slowly. "How did this stay buried?" Carla's voice is low. Someone in records marked the file corrupted, but the original was still on the backup server. The chief leans back in his chair. Internal Affairs is going to have a field day with this. Across town, Marcus sits in his hospital bed, the tablet balanced on his lap. Sheila Grant is beside him, scrolling through a folder of evidence on her laptop. "This is the new body cam footage they just found," she says. "It proves 2 things, Blake's pattern of behavior and the fact that the department suppressed evidence." Marcus shakes his head. "So it's not just him, it's the system covering for him." Sheila nods. "Exactly. And that makes this bigger than one officer. If the DA's smart, they'll start looking at who else signed off on these corrupt files." Terrence, leaning against the window frame, adds, "And the protests are only getting bigger. People smell blood now." At City Hall, the mayor meets with the DA and members of the Police Oversight Committee. The DA slides a printed list across the table, 7 names. "These are other cases where Blake was the responding officer and complaints disappeared," the DA says. "We're reopening all of them, and we're issuing subpoenas for the record staff who signed off on the deletions." The mayor nods grimly. The public wanted one man held accountable. Now they're about to see the rot underneath. In his apartment, Daniel Blake sits hunched at his kitchen table, staring at the yellow envelope from the night before. His phone rings. It's his lawyer. "They've got body cam footage," the lawyer says without preamble. "You didn't log it, and they're saying you falsified records." Blake grips the phone tighter. "That footage wasn't supposed to exist anymore." "Well, it does," the lawyer says. "And now they're expanding the investigation. You're looking at possible obstruction charges on top of assault." Blake's voice drops to a growl. "They're making an example out of me." The lawyer doesn't argue. "You need to come in. The chief's calling you to the office this afternoon." By midday, the precinct is buzzing. Reporters are camped outside, shoving microphones toward any officer who walks out. Protesters chant louder than ever, their signs now targeting not just Blake but the entire department. In his office, Chief Reynolds waits, the body cam footage paused on his computer screen. When Blake walks in, Reynolds doesn't bother with small talk. "Sit down." Blake drops into the chair, jaw tight. "What now?" Reynolds turns the monitor toward him and hits play. The scene unfolds. The teenager, the shove, the absence of any official process. "That," Reynolds says, "is you 2 months ago, and that is you lying in your report." Blake leans back, arms crossed. "Kid was mouthing off. I was teaching him a lesson." "You falsified the record," Reynolds snaps. "You hid the footage, and now the DA's looking at obstruction. You've put this department in deeper trouble than you realize." Blake smirks, but there's no conviction behind it. "You think they're just coming after me? They'll come after everyone who ever signed off on me. That includes you, Chief." For a moment, the room is silent. Reynolds' eyes narrow. Maybe they should. Later that evening, the DA holds a brief press conference. Standing before a wall of cameras, she announces, "We have obtained additional evidence indicating a pattern of misconduct by Officer Daniel Blake. This includes unreported incidents, falsified records, and suppressed body cam footage. The scope of this investigation has now expanded to include possible obstruction and conspiracy charges." The words ripple through the city like a shockwave. At the hospital, Marcus watches the announcement with Terrence and Sheila. For the first time since that rainy night in the alley, he allows himself a small, cautious smile. "This isn't just about me anymore," he says quietly. "No," Sheila agrees. "It's about every person who thought they'd never be believed." By sunrise the next day, Daniel Blake knows something has changed. The calls from his few remaining friends on the force have stopped. The texts he sent overnight, asking for updates, for someone to have his back, remain unread. It's as if a silent order went out to cut him loose. He sits at his kitchen table, staring at the muted television. Every news channel is running the same footage. Crowds outside the courthouse, the DA speaking about obstruction charges, the second body cam video playing in an endless loop. His name is no longer just a headline. It's shorthand for everything wrong with the department. When his phone finally does ring, it's his lawyer. "The union's not going to cover your legal fees anymore," the lawyer says bluntly. Blake's grip tightens on the phone. "What do you mean they're not covering me? That's what the union's for." "Not in a case like this," the lawyer replies. "They think you're a liability. And honestly, they're not wrong. More witnesses are coming forward. People you stopped, people you roughed up. They all stayed quiet before. Not anymore." Blake hangs up without saying goodbye. The silence in the apartment feels heavier than the noise outside. At Grady Memorial, Marcus finishes another physical therapy session. The stiffness in his ribs is easing, but the bruises still run deep. Terrence walks beside him as a nurse wheels him back to his room. On the small TV, a news panel debates the case. One commentator says, "This isn't just about one bad officer. This is about the culture that allowed him to operate for years without consequences." Marcus shakes his head. "They're right. If it was just me, they'd have buried it." Attorney Sheila Grant arrives moments later, her expression sharp. "The grand jury date is set for next week," she says, "but Blake's lawyer is already trying to negotiate a deal, reduce charges in exchange for resigning from the force." Terrence frowns. "That's it? He gets to walk away?" "Not if we keep the pressure on," Sheila says. "The public wants accountability. The DA knows that. If we make enough noise, they won't take a deal that easy." At the precinct, Chief Reynolds meets privately with the Police Oversight Committee. The mood in the room is grim. "This isn't just about cleaning up one mess," one committee member says. "This is about showing the public we can police our own." Reynolds nods slowly. "Then we start with full cooperation. Every file, every complaint, every report tied to Blake's badge number goes to the DA. No exceptions." By late afternoon, the protests outside the courthouse swell again, bolstered by new supporters, veterans groups carrying flags and banners that read, "Justice for one of our own." The sight of them marching alongside local activists makes national headlines. In the crowd, Jasmine Cole films live on her phone. Thousands watch her feed as she pans over the sea of signs and chants. "They thought they could scare me into silence," she says to the camera, "but the truth's out now and it's not going back in the dark." Meanwhile, Blake takes a rare walk outside, hood pulled low, avoiding eye contact. Even in the grocery store, he feels the stares, people recognizing him from the news. A man in the cereal aisle mutters something under his breath. Blake can't make out the words, but the contempt in the tone is clear. When he gets back to his apartment, there's another envelope under the door. This one isn't anonymous, it's from the state licensing board. He opens it and reads, "Notice of review. Your law enforcement certification is under formal investigation and may be revoked pending outcome of criminal proceedings." For the first time, he feels the ground truly give way beneath him. That evening, Marcus sits by his hospital window, looking out at the city lights. Terrence scrolls through his phone and reads aloud. Latest poll says 78% of residents think Blake should face prison time. Marcus doesn't smile, but there's a calm in his voice. It's not about numbers, it's about making sure this never happens again. Sheila, packing up her notes for tomorrow's prep session, looks at him. "Then we make sure it doesn't." Outside, the chants from the courthouse drift faintly through the night air, a steady reminder that the city is still watching, still demanding. And somewhere across town, Daniel Blake sits alone in his darkened apartment, the walls closing in, not from the noise outside, but from the silence of a world that's finally stopped protecting him. The morning sun filters into Marcus Reed's hospital room, catching the steam rising from a fresh cup of coffee on the table. He's dressed in clean civilian clothes for the first time since the attack. Dark jeans, a gray sweater provided by a local veterans group. His bruises have faded slightly, but they're still visible, reminders of that rainy night. Attorney Sheila Grant stands near the door, reviewing her notes. "Today is important," she says. "The press conference isn't just about telling your story. It's about making sure no one can twist it before the grand jury hears it." Terrence adjusts Marcus's collar. "You ready for this?" Marcus exhales slowly. "I've been ready since the moment he hit me." Outside the hospital, a makeshift stage has been set up. Reporters gather in a semicircle, cameras mounted on tripods. Protesters line the sidewalk, holding signs and chanting softly as they wait. The air carries the smell of fresh rain and street food from nearby vendors. When Marcus steps up to the podium, the murmurs quiet. He grips the sides, steadying himself, and begins. "My name is Marcus Reed. I'm a veteran of the United States Army. I served 2 tours in Afghanistan. I came home thinking I'd earned the right to live in peace, but here in my own city, I was treated like an enemy, by someone sworn to protect it." Cameras click rapidly. Marcus's voice is even, but the weight behind it is unmistakable. "I wasn't breaking any laws. I wasn't threatening anyone. I was sitting in the rain, trying to stay warm. And Officer Daniel Blake decided that was enough reason to beat me. He decided my life didn't matter." He pauses, looking over the crowd. "This isn't just about me. It's about every person who's been afraid to speak up because they thought no one would believe them. It's about a system that protects those who abuse power instead of the people they're supposed to serve." The applause that follows is loud and sustained. Some in the crowd are wiping tears from their eyes. Watching the live feed from his apartment, Blake paces back and forth, fists clenched. The sound of Marcus's voice fills the room, each word cutting into the carefully constructed narrative he's told himself. He switches the TV off, but the silence feels worse. His phone buzzes. It's his lawyer again. "They're not taking the deal," the lawyer says flatly. "The DA wants full charges: assault, obstruction, falsifying reports. If the grand jury votes to indict, you're looking at real prison time." Blake grips the phone tighter. "Then we make sure the grand jury doesn't indict." The lawyer sighs. "You don't have the leverage for that anymore. And the people who used to protect you, they're protecting themselves now." At the precinct, Chief Reynolds watches Marcus's speech on his office computer. Detective Carla Mitchell steps in quietly. "Crowd's bigger than last week," she notes. Reynolds nods. "He's not just a victim anymore. He's a symbol. That's the kind of thing you can't put back in the box." Carla leans against the wall. "You think Blake's realizing it's over?" The chief looks out the window at the protesters gathering in the distance. If he hasn't yet, he will. That afternoon, Sheila escorts Marcus and Terrence into the DA's office. They review the plan for the grand jury presentation, the 2 videos, the body cam footage, the witness statements, and Marcus's own testimony. "This isn't just about proving what happened," the DA says. "It's about showing the jury there's a pattern, that this wasn't one bad night, it was years of unchecked behavior." Marcus nods. "I'll say whatever I need to." Meanwhile, in a dimly lit bar across town, Blake sits hunched over a drink. A couple of off-duty officers are at a table nearby. He recognizes them but doesn't approach. He hears his name in their hushed conversation, followed by laughter. When he steps outside, the late afternoon air feels colder than it should. Another envelope waits under the windshield wiper of his car. Inside is a photocopy of his police personnel file, certain sections highlighted, each one a past complaint, each one now under review. Scrawled across the last page in red marker are the words, "No more hiding." That night, Marcus lies in his hospital bed, scrolling through messages of support on his tablet. Terrence sits nearby, reading news updates aloud. "They're saying the grand jury will convene in 3 days, Terrence says. "City officials are bracing for more protests no matter what the decision is." Marcus sets the tablet down. "Then we make sure they know the whole truth before they walk into that room." Sheila, packing up her notes, glances at him. "You've already done more than most people ever would, but if you're ready to finish this, we'll finish it." Marcus nods once. "We finish it." Outside, the sound of distant chanting drifts through the night air, steady, relentless, and growing louder. The courthouse steps are a sea of bodies before sunrise. Protesters holding signs and flags cluster shoulder to shoulder, their breath visible in the cool morning air. Television crews have set up their cameras along the edges, aiming their lenses at the heavy wooden doors where the grand jury will soon enter. Inside, the atmosphere is completely different, silent, controlled. Security officers guide jurors through metal detectors, past marble hallways lined with portraits of judges long gone. In a small windowless room on the third floor, 12 jurors take their seats around a long oak table. They've been told the process will take all day, maybe longer. District Attorney Linda Mercer stands at the front, a thick binder of evidence at her side. This is a case involving allegations of assault, obstruction of justice, falsification of official records, and a potential pattern of misconduct by Officer Daniel Blake, she begins. She clicks a remote and the first video fills the wall-mounted screen. Jasmine Cole's original footage. The room is quiet except for the sound of rain and the dull thud of Blake's fists against Marcus Reed's ribs. When it ends, Mercer lets the silence linger before playing the second video, the one from across the street, showing Blake approaching without hesitation, without any sign of provocation. A few jurors shift in their seats, exchanging uneasy glances. At Grady Memorial Hospital, Marcus sits with Terrence and Sheila Grant, knowing that somewhere downtown, strangers are deciding the course of his case. He sips coffee from a paper cup, the bitter taste doing nothing to calm the restlessness in his chest. Sheila glances at her phone. They're starting with the videos. That's good. It sets the tone before they get into the paperwork. Terrence leans forward. How long before we know? Could be hours, Sheila says. Could be days. But with what they've got, I'd be surprised if they don't indict. Marcus stares out the window at the cloudy sky. Surprised, maybe, but not shocked. Back in the grand jury room, Mercer begins detailing Blake's past. These are prior complaints involving Officer Blake over the last 7 years, she says, sliding packets to each juror. Many were dismissed. Some were never investigated at all. Several show patterns of unprovoked aggression toward civilians, particularly minorities. She plays a segment of recovered body cam footage, the teenager in the parking lot, the rough shove against the patrol car. She points out the missing report, the corrupted file note in the record system. This isn't one bad decision on one rainy night, Mercer says. This is a consistent abuse of power, shielded by a system that failed to hold him accountable. At his apartment, Blake sits at his kitchen table with his lawyer, the blinds drawn tight. They're going to spin everything, Blake says. Make it sound like every call I ever took was dirty. His lawyer spreads out copies of the evidence. They don't have to spin anything. The videos speak for themselves. If the jury indicts, we'll focus on trial strategy. But you need to prepare yourself. This is out of our hands now. Blake leans back, rubbing his temples. It's not just them. The department's feeding them. They want me gone so they can save themselves. The lawyer doesn't answer. Outside the courthouse, the crowd has doubled since dawn. Veterans in uniform stand side by side with community activists, their signs raised high. Jasmine Cole moves through the crowd with her phone streaming live. They're in there right now, she says to her viewers. Every single one of us is here to make sure they know we're not going away. By early afternoon, the grand jury hears testimony from Sheila Grant, who walks them through the inconsistencies in Blake's reports, the timeline of the videos, and Marcus's account of the night. I'm not here asking for sympathy, Sheila tells them. I'm asking for accountability. If an ordinary citizen had done this to a police officer, we wouldn't even be here debating it. There would already be charges. At the hospital, Marcus keeps the TV off. He doesn't want to watch the speculation, the talking heads arguing over what should happen. Instead, he sits quietly, replaying his own testimony in his mind, the part he gave to investigators weeks ago. Terrence breaks the silence. Whatever they decide, you did everything you could. Marcus nods, but his eyes stay on the window. Now it's up to them. As the sun sets, the jurors are still deliberating. The courthouse lights glow against the darkening sky. Outside, the crowd refuses to leave, their chants echoing up the stone walls. Inside, a four-person stands, a sealed envelope in hand. The decision is ready. The four-person sealed envelope sits on District Attorney Linda Mercer's desk like it weighs 100 pounds. She's read its contents twice, just to make sure she hasn't missed a word. Outside her office window, the courthouse steps are still packed with protesters, their chants echoing through the night air. When she finally picks up the phone, she calls one number first. Chief Reynolds, she says, her voice steady, the grand jury has returned a true bill. Officer Daniel Blake is formally indicted on all charges: assault, obstruction of justice, falsifying official reports, and misconduct in office. We're moving forward. There's a pause on the line before Reynolds replies. Understood. I'll take it from here. At the 7th precinct, the building is quieter than usual. Most of the day shift has gone home, and the night shift hasn't fully taken over yet. Reynolds stands at his office window, staring at the glowing city skyline for a long moment before turning to his desk phone. He presses a button. Send Blake in. Across town, Blake sits in his dim apartment, the TV showing muted news coverage of the protests. He's still in sweats, unshaven, his badge long since turned in. When his phone rings, he glances at the screen. Desk sergeant. The chief wants to see you, tonight, the sergeant says. Blake lets out a dry laugh. What's the point? I'm suspended. His words, no excuses. When Blake arrives at the precinct, he notices the difference immediately. No nods, no greetings, just sidelong glances as he walks down the hall. Officers he's known for years step aside without a word. Reynolds is waiting for him in the office, door already open. Close it, the chief says. Blake obeys, then drops into the chair across from him. What's this about? Reynolds leans forward, resting his forearms on the desk. You've been indicted, Daniel. Every charge they could hit you with, they did. Blake smirks, but there's no real confidence behind it. So that's it? You're throwing me to the wolves? This isn't me throwing you anywhere, Reynolds says sharply. This is you, backed into a corner of your own making. The evidence is overwhelming. 2 videos, a suppressed body cam file, witness statements, a history of complaints. If you think I can shield you from that, you're not living in reality. Blake's jaw tightens. You think this department's gonna survive handing me over? People are gonna look at you and see you let one of your own get burned alive. They're already looking at me, Reynolds replies, and what they see is a chief cleaning house. I'd rather take that than go down as the man who let you drag us all under. For a moment, neither man speaks. Outside the closed door, the muffled hum of the precinct goes on as if nothing is happening. Reynolds finally leans back. The DA's office will be issuing a warrant tomorrow morning. My advice? Turn yourself in before they come knocking. It'll look better in court. Blake lets out a short, humorless laugh. You really think I'm gonna make it that easy for them? The chief's eyes harden. If you don't, they'll make it hard. And trust me, you won't like their version. Back at Grady Memorial, Marcus is awake despite the late hour. Terrence sits in the corner scrolling through his phone when a news alert pops up. Grand jury indicted him, Terrence says, his voice tinged with relief. Marcus exhales slowly, letting the words sink in. So now it's official. Sheila, who had just walked in with a folder under her arm, adds, Tomorrow they'll serve the warrant. Once he's booked, the trial clock starts ticking. We've crossed the biggest hurdle. Marcus nods. Then we keep going. No letting up now. Back at the precinct, Blake stands up to leave. His hand lingers on the doorknob for a moment before he turns back to Reynolds. You know they're not going to stop with me, Blake says. They'll go after anyone who ever signed off on one of my reports. That includes you. Reynolds doesn't flinch. Maybe they should. Blake stares at him for a long moment, then opens the door and walks out. The click of his boots echoes down the hallway, each step sounding more like the end of something than the start of anything new. Outside, the city hums under the weight of what's coming. The protests don't fade with nightfall. They burn on, voices rising against the backdrop of flashing lights and restless streets. And somewhere between the courthouse and the precinct, a warrant with Daniel Blake's name on it waits to be served. Morning breaks gray and cold over Atlanta. The air is damp, the streets still slick from an overnight drizzle. Outside the courthouse, the crowd is already forming. Signs lifted high, news cameras setting up for the day's coverage. Word is spread fast. The indictment is official, and the warrant for Daniel Blake's arrest will be served today. At the 7th precinct, Chief Reynolds sits behind his desk, coffee cooling beside a stack of paperwork. The phone call from the DA's office was short. They're on their way. Reynolds knows it will be easier if Blake turns himself in, but he doubts that will happen. Across town, Blake sits in his dimly lit apartment, a duffel bag on the floor beside him. He's been up all night, pacing, debating whether to run or face what's coming. Every option feels like losing. His phone buzzes. It's his lawyer. They're coming for you this morning, the lawyer says. If you're smart, you'll walk into the courthouse on your own. It's better than being dragged out in cuffs. Blake stares at the floor. Walking in makes me look guilty. You are indicted, Daniel. That's the point. The call ends without a goodbye. At Grady Memorial Hospital, Marcus is finishing breakfast when Terrence walks in with his phone in hand. They're arresting him today, he says, scrolling through a live news feed. Reporters are already outside the precinct. Marcus takes a slow sip of coffee. I want to see it, he says quietly. Sheila Grant, seated across from him, nods. You'll see it. Every camera in this city will be rolling when it happens. By mid-morning, 2 unmarked sedans pull up outside Blake's apartment building. Detectives from the DA's office step out, their jackets marked with bold yellow lettering. Investigations Unit. A cameraman across the street captures every moment as they enter the building. Inside, Blake stands by the window watching them approach. His hands clench into fists, but he doesn't move. When the knock comes, it's firm and unyielding. "Daniel Blake," a voice calls. "We have a warrant for your arrest." He opens the door slowly, his expression caught somewhere between defiance and resignation. The detectives read him his rights as they cuff his wrists. Cameras flash from the sidewalk as he's led down the steps, the sound of shutters mixing with shouts from onlookers. "Justice for Marcus!" someone yells. "No one's above the law!" Blake keeps his head down, jaw tight, as he's placed into the back of the sedan. Back at the courthouse, news crews swarm the steps, broadcasting live updates. The arrest footage plays on giant screens mounted to vans, the crowd reacting with a mix of cheers and raw emotion. Marcus, still in his hospital room, watches the coverage on TV. Terrence sits beside him, a hand on his shoulder. "It's real now," Terrence says. Marcus's eyes stay on the screen. "Yeah, but it's not over." At the precinct, Reynolds receives the confirmation call. "He's in custody," the voice on the other end says. The chief hangs up and exhales, a long, slow breath. For all the chaos, for all the damage, there's a strange quiet in knowing this part is done. Detective Carla Mitchell steps into his office. "They've got him?" "Yeah," Reynolds says. "Now the hard part starts." By afternoon, Blake is escorted into the courthouse, still in cuffs, flanked by deputies. The marble lobby echoes with the sound of his footsteps. He's processed quickly. Fingerprints, mugshot, the formal reading of charges. The DA addresses reporters in the hallway. "This case will proceed to trial. We have video evidence, multiple witness statements, and a documented pattern of misconduct. No one, regardless of their position, is above accountability." The words are carried live on every major network. That evening, the protests grow into celebration rallies in some parts of the city, while others hold candlelight vigils for victims of police violence. Marcus watches a clip of veterans marching with banners that read, "We stand with Marcus." Sheila closes her briefcase. "This is a win, Marcus, but now we prepare for trial. They'll fight harder than ever once they're in the courtroom." Marcus nods. "Then we fight harder too." Across town, in a holding cell beneath the courthouse, Blake sits alone on a metal bench staring at the floor. For the first time, the noise outside is gone. No chants, no cameras, just silence and the hum of fluorescent lights overhead. He leans back against the wall, knowing that the next time he steps outside, it will be into a courtroom where the whole city will be watching, and this time, he won't be the one in control. The courthouse steps are crowded before the sun is fully up. Television crews line the sidewalk, their camera lights casting harsh white beams through the early morning haze. Protesters stand shoulder to shoulder behind metal barricades, their voices echoing off the stone facade. "Justice for Marcus!" blends with the rhythmic beat of a lone drum somewhere in the back of the crowd. Inside, security is tight. Uniformed deputies check IDs and scan bags before allowing anyone through the main doors. In the hallway outside courtroom 4B, the press waits with notepads and microphones, ready to capture the first images of Daniel Blake in front of a judge. At Grady Memorial Hospital, Marcus is dressed and ready earlier than usual. Sheila Grant sits beside him, scrolling through her phone. "They'll bring him into court in cuffs," she says, "but his lawyer will probably push for release on bail. We need to be there to make sure the judge understands how dangerous that would be." Terrence hands Marcus his jacket. "I've got the car waiting downstairs. Let's get you there." Marcus hesitates for a moment before standing. "I want to see him hear the charges out loud." Back in the courthouse, Chief Reynolds walks through a side entrance, avoiding the front steps and the cameras. He's not here to testify, at least not today, but the DA asked him to be present. As he moves down the hallway, he passes Detective Carla Mitchell, who nods in silent acknowledgement. They both know the department's reputation is on trial here too. At exactly 9:15 a.m., deputies lead Blake out from a side door into the packed courtroom. His orange jumpsuit is freshly pressed, but the dark circles under his eyes tell their own story. The room quiets as he's guided to the defense table, his cuffs removed only after he sits down. His lawyer leans in, whispering something that makes Blake's jaw clench. The clerk stands and begins reading the charges. 1 count of aggravated assault, 1 count of obstruction of justice, 1 count of falsifying official reports, multiple counts of misconduct in office. Each count feels like a stone dropping into still water, the ripples visible on the faces in the gallery. Marcus enters quietly with Sheila and Terrence, taking a seat in the second row. Blake's eyes flicker toward him for just a moment before darting away. When the judge asks for a plea, Blake's voice is steady but low. Not guilty. The defense immediately requests bail, arguing that Blake has no prior criminal record and poses no flight risk. The DA counters forcefully. Your Honor, the defendant has already demonstrated a willingness to abuse his authority and obstruct justice. Releasing him would endanger witnesses and undermine public trust in this process. There's a pause as the judge weighs the arguments, the entire room holding its breath. Bail is denied, the judge finally says. The defendant will remain in custody until trial. Outside the courthouse, the announcement hits the crowd like a spark in dry grass. Cheers erupt, chants grow louder, and reporters rush to broadcast the update. Inside, Blake's lawyer mutters something under his breath as deputies secure the cuffs again. Blake keeps his head forward, not looking at anyone as he's led away. Marcus exhales, a tension he didn't realize he was holding easing just slightly. Sheila leans closer. This is good. It means they take the risk seriously. Terrence grips Marcus's shoulder. One step closer. In the hallway, Chief Reynolds speaks briefly with the DA. Keeping him inside until trial will calm the streets, Reynolds says. Maybe, the DA replies, but it's also going to make him desperate, and desperate defendants can be unpredictable. Later that afternoon, news networks run the footage of Blake's court appearance on a loop. Commentators debate the strength of the case, but most agree that the videos, the body cam evidence, and the growing list of witnesses form a nearly airtight prosecution. In his holding cell, Blake sits alone, staring at the wall. The echo of the judge's words, "Bail is denied," plays over and over in his mind. For the first time, he's starting to realize he may never wear a badge again, and that the next uniform he puts on could be a prison one. At the hospital, Marcus watches the coverage in silence. When the clip ends, he turns to Sheila. So what happens now? Sheila closes her laptop. Now we prepare for trial, and we make sure the jury sees everything, every bruise, every lie, every cover-up. No shortcuts. Marcus nods slowly. Then let's get to work. Outside, the city hums with restless energy, waiting for the next chapter in a case that has already changed everything. The following week is a blur of preparation. Inside the district attorney's office, stacks of files cover every flat surface. Photographs, transcripts, and reports are spread out across long tables. A large corkboard holds a timeline of Daniel Blake's career, dotted with red pins marking every documented complaint. DA Linda Mercer stands at the head of the table, briefing her team. We are not just prosecuting one night in an alley, she says. We're prosecuting years of misconduct. The videos show the crime, but the history shows the intent. That's what convinces a jury. At Grady Memorial Hospital, Marcus spends most of his time with Sheila Grant, going over his testimony again and again. She wants every detail clear, every timeline solid. Juries respond to consistency, she tells him. We can't give the defense anything to twist. Marcus nods, but his mind keeps drifting back to the rainy night when it all began. Feels strange, he says quietly, that I have to work this hard just to prove what everyone saw with their own eyes. Sheila pauses, meeting his gaze. The truth isn't always enough in court, but the truth plus preparation? That's how we win. Meanwhile, in the county detention center, Blake sits with his lawyer in a windowless meeting room. The lawyer flips through a thick binder. They're going to bring up every complaint you've ever had, he says, even the ones that were dismissed. They'll argue it's a pattern. Blake leans back, arms crossed. Most of those people were lying. The lawyer sighs. That doesn't matter now. The jury won't see it that way. Not after those videos. We need to focus on creating doubt. Maybe we argue you believed Reed posed a threat. Blake smirks. Good. Because I still do. The lawyer closes the binder. That attitude is exactly what's going to sink you if you let it slip in court. Back at the precinct, Chief Reynolds meets privately with Detective Carla Mitchell. She's been helping the DA's team access old case files. They've already uncovered 3 incidents where complaints vanished from the system, Carla says. If the jury hears that, it's not just Blake who's on trial. It's us. Reynolds rubs his forehead. Then we cooperate fully. No more protecting him. No more protecting anyone. This department needs to come out of this cleaner than it went in. Outside the courthouse, the protests haven't stopped. Every afternoon, hundreds gather with signs, chanting for accountability. Veterans groups march alongside civil rights activists, their unity drawing national attention. Jasmine Cole, the woman who filmed the first video, has become a familiar face at these rallies. Speaking into a microphone, she tells the crowd, "This case isn't just about Marcus Reed, it's about every time the system looked away. We're here to make sure it never looks away again." Inside the DA's war room, Linda Mercer points to a photograph of Marcus in uniform during his army service. "This, she says, will be the closing image in our opening statement. The jury needs to see who he was before that night. A soldier, a neighbor, a human being." She turns to Sheila. "How's Marcus holding up?" "He's ready," Sheila says. "Tired, but ready." Mercer nods. "Good. Because the defense is going to try to drag his name through the mud. We make sure they fail." In his cell that night, Blake lies on the thin mattress staring at the ceiling. The fluorescent light outside the bars hums faintly. He thinks about the people he used to count on, the officers who once called him a friend, the superiors who turned a blind eye. Now, none of them return his calls. The next time he's in a room with them, it'll be as a defendant. 2 days later, Sheila drives Marcus to the courthouse for a pre-trial meeting with the DA. As they pass the protesters, Marcus notices a handmade sign, "Justice is coming." He stares at it until it's out of sight. In the conference room, Mercer lays out the plan. "We start jury selection next week. The defense will try to weed out anyone who supports the protests. We'll counter by striking anyone with law enforcement ties who can't be impartial." Marcus listens, then says, "Whatever happens, I want to testify. I want them to hear it from me." Mercer nods. "They will. And when you're done, they'll believe you." That night, the local news runs a teaser for their next segment. Inside the prosecution's strategy against Officer Blake and why the trial could change the city forever. In living rooms across Atlanta, people pause to watch, knowing the trial isn't just about one man's guilt, it's about the city deciding what kind of justice it believes in. And in the detention center, Blake watches too, jaw tight, already thinking about what he'll say when it's finally his turn to speak. The first day of the trial begins under a clear blue sky, but the air outside the Fulton County Courthouse is electric with tension. Metal barricades line the steps, separating protesters from the press, while uniformed officers form a tight perimeter. The chants are steady, rhythmic, and unrelenting. "Justice for Marcus!" Inside, the courtroom is full. The jury, 7 women, 5 men, sits in 2 neat rows, their expressions unreadable. At the prosecution table, District Attorney Linda Mercer flips through her notes. Beside her, Sheila Grant rests a hand briefly on Marcus Reed's shoulder. Across the aisle, Daniel Blake sits stiffly in a navy suit, his hands folded in front of him. The orange jumpsuit is gone, but the weight of weeks in custody still shows in the sharp lines of his face. His lawyer whispers something in his ear, but Blake's eyes stay forward. Mercer opens the trial with a deliberate pace, laying out the facts. The 2 videos, the falsified reports, the suppressed body cam footage, and the string of prior complaints. "This case is about abuse of power," she says, looking directly at the jury. "It is about a man who used his badge not to protect but to harm. And it is about the system that allowed him to do it, until now." When it's Sheila's turn to question Marcus, he takes the stand slowly, walking with measured steps. The courtroom is silent as he tells his story from the beginning. His army service, his injury, the years on the street, and that rainy night. His voice doesn't waver, even when describing the moment Blake's fist struck his ribs. "I served overseas," Marcus says, "and I came home believing my city would see me as one of their own. But that night, I realized some people will only ever see the color of my skin." Several jurors shift in their seats, eyes fixed on him. The defense tries to paint Marcus as confrontational, suggesting he may have provoked the encounter. But the videos play again on the big screen, side by side, showing Blake approaching without hesitation, shoving Marcus before a single word is exchanged. On cross-examination, Mercer dismantles Blake's account piece by piece. "You wrote in your report that Mr. Reed was aggressive," she says, holding up the document. "Can you point to a single moment in these videos where that's true?" Blake hesitates, glances at his lawyer, then mutters, "It's what I perceived at the time." "Perception," Mercer replies evenly, "does not erase the truth." The trial lasts 5 days. Witness after witness takes the stand. Jasmine Cole with her original footage, the second witness with her own video, the teenager from the body cam clip, and even officers from the precinct who admit they'd seen Blake lose his temper before. By the time closing arguments arrive, the jury has heard not just about one night, but about years of unchecked behavior. Mercer's final words are simple. You have the power to tell this city and every city that no one is above the law. Deliberations take less than a day. Late in the afternoon, word comes that the jury has reached a verdict. The courtroom fills again, the air heavy with anticipation. Marcus sits between Sheila and Terrence, hands clasped tightly. The foreperson stands. On the charge of aggravated assault, we find the defendant guilty. A murmur ripples through the gallery. On the charge of obstruction of justice, guilty. On the charge of falsifying official reports, guilty. On the charge of misconduct in office, guilty. Marcus exhales, a slow, controlled breath. Terrence grips his shoulder. Across the room, Blake's face hardens, but the slight tremor in his jaw betrays him. The judge thanks the jury and announces sentencing will take place in 2 weeks. Deputies move to escort Blake out of the courtroom. Cameras flash as he's led through the side door, his future no longer in his hands. Outside, the chants turn to cheers. Strangers embrace, veterans salute Marcus as he emerges from the courthouse. Microphones are thrust toward him, but he speaks only one sentence. This wasn't just my fight, it was ours. Weeks later, Blake is sentenced to 12 years in state prison, with no possibility of parole for the first 8. The department announces sweeping reforms, mandatory body cam audits, independent oversight for misconduct cases, and a review of every officer's complaint history. Marcus uses part of his settlement to start the Reed Foundation, an organization dedicated to helping homeless veterans find housing, jobs, and legal support. At the ribbon-cutting ceremony, he stands before a small crowd and says, "Justice isn't just about punishment, it's about building something better in its place." The city still carries its scars, but something has shifted. People talk about accountability now, not as a distant hope, but as an expectation. And though Marcus knows no verdict can erase what happened that night, he walks forward with the quiet certainty that change, real change, is possible. For Daniel Blake, his name will forever be a cautionary tale. For Marcus Reed, his will be a reminder of resilience. And for the city of Atlanta, this chapter closes with a single truth echoing in its streets: justice was seen and it was done.